What's up, witches? I'm Allie, aka BronxWitch, and welcome back to my channel, where you are the magic, and where I talk about Wicca the religion, witchcraft the practice, and tarot. And this is the first of what I'm thinking might become a series of videos, because, well, I've made a lot of mistakes while witching, and I feel like it might be helpful for me to share some of those mistakes and what I did to correct it, or why I chose to change a practice or something, because those have been some of the most educational moments for me, and maybe they'll be helpful for you. And I'm sharing these things because I think it's good to remind ourselves that making mistakes is okay. You will survive, most likely. And in my experience, it turns out that how you course correct can make all the difference. In this mistakes I made while witching video, I wanted to talk about keeping a magical record. And the biggest mistake I made in that area, which was focusing on creating a magical guide for myself rather than keeping a magical diary of my actual journey and process. My understanding on the usefulness of both of these types of magical records, and even what I call them, has changed for the better. So I wanted to share that with you. For a very long time, too long, the only magical record that I kept was what I called my Book of Shadows. You may have seen it in my Book of Shadows video. It's back there, and it's a huge binder that includes organized sections on topics like zodiac and astrology. It has tons of info and recipes. And I love my Book of Shadows. It's years worth of information. But it doesn't really tell you anything about how I got here, how I learned these recipes or spells, the times that I did them, and probably most importantly, what happened after I used that great recipe or cast that spell. Now, different people have different views on the difference between a Book of Shadows and a grimoire, but I have come to understand that a grimoire is more of a magical guide that includes lists of color correspondences, zodiac charts, spells, recipes, stuff like that, while a Book of Shadows is more like a diary. You might put recipes and lists and things in it, but it's mostly a real-time accounting of what you're working on magically right now. So while I was calling my magical journal my Book of Shadows, I was treating it more like a grimoire. And I've realized that a Book of Shadows, a diary, is useful for every witch, especially if you're just starting out, while a grimoire is useful for recording your final recipes and info for easy future reference, or perhaps even sharing with others. Now, of course, some witches create a hybrid of both, but for some reason that didn't occur to me. Now, in my defense, as a young witch, most published material about magical records that I could get my hands on were grimoires, or about keeping a grimoire. And confusingly, these grimoires are sometimes referred to by their authors as Books of Shadows. So as a young witch, that became my focus, creating a how-to magical guide for myself that had every piece of magical info that I could ever need, so that no matter what happened, I could flip through it and find the answer. That's what I was calling my Book of Shadows. And that's probably a great thing to create eventually, but it's not the type of journal that's really going to help a witch out on her journey. Because while my old Book of Shadows is a great collection of things that I have collected, learned, read over the years, it hasn't been as helpful as I would like it to be, because it's static and generic and almost hypothetical. Because a lot of the things in it haven't really been played with and developed. I realized fairly recently that I actually needed to be keeping a proper Book of Shadows, a real-time diary of anything and everything magical that I may be working on or invested in, even if it isn't, especially if it isn't polished or perfect. So I had to change my approach to my magical record keeping, and it has made a huge difference. When it comes to my grimoire, or Book of Shadows, as I used to call it back in the day, I used to have to schedule time to work on it. So I would sit down and I would make these perfect pages of recipes and instructions, and I would gather my materials and I would write out incantations and recipes and info that I felt needed to be in my book, even though it hadn't yet become a part of my practice. Now, I write in my new Book of Shadows almost every day without even trying. There are notes in the margins, there's crossouts, doodles, there's things I've printed, there are pictures, there's random objects that I've taped and glued to the pages, and inspired by a great idea by @BossyBruja on Instagram, I've even cast a couple of spells right into the book itself. And that's been a really powerful experience and a great way to keep track of the magic that I'm working. There's no order to this book. There are no designated sections and topics, just daily entries about the magical things happening in my life or that I'm learning. And as time goes on and the recipes or information in my Book of Shadows become, my go-tos, I can record them all nice and neat and all that and put it in my grimoire. And it'll be cool to see over time how it grows, but my grimoire is not my focus right now. If you're a BronxWitch member, tune in tomorrow because I'm actually going to give you guys a little flip through of my old Book of Shadows and my new one so I can show you some specifics on how I'm approaching this differently and how I see the difference between a magical guide and a magical diary. So, I wanted to share this with you because I feel like this was a mistake that I was making, and the process of correcting it has really transformed a part of my magical practice that had previously been the same literally for years. So yeah, if you're just starting out making a magical journal, maybe you're overwhelmed by the idea of what should go into it or how it should be laid out, or you have a magical journal and you don't feel like you work with it enough, then it could be your approach like it was for me. So whatever you call your magical journal, if your focus has been on trying to create a guidebook, you might benefit way more from, approaching your Book of Shadows as more of a diary. And this might seem totally obvious to some witches, but it wasn't for me for a long time. I've only recently realized the, mistake I was making while witching. And making this change has really changed the game for me. Maybe it will for you. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about this mistake I made while witching and that it helps you, hopefully, to avoid making the same. If it did, or if you just like this video, please click the thumbs up. You can leave any comments or questions below, and of course, subscribe. Click the bell button so you're notified every time a new video comes out. Join us in the members section. We've been having a lot of fun over there already. And you can follow me on Instagram @BronxWitch. Blessed be.